This is Ed Brisson, and you're listening to the True North Country Comics Podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book creators and supporters. It's July 2nd, 2021. I'm John Swinimer. If you want to drop me a line, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. On this episode, I chat with Ed Brisson about Beyond the Breach. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. It's also available on the True North Country Comics channel on YouTube. I invite you to like and subscribe. As a comic book writer who's garnered attention with his self-published crime series Murder Book, he followed that work with 4 other series that he's written and co-created, published by Image: Sheltered, The Field, The Mantle, and The Violent. Ed has also written for Boom, Sons of Anarchy, Cluster, The Last Contract, Marvel, Secret Avengers, Secret Wars Battle World, and more, DC, Batman and Robin Eternal, IDW, TMNT, X-Files Conspiracy, and many others. He's written New Mutants, Spirit of Ghost Rider, Mother of Demons, Avengers of the Wasteland for Marvel, and more. He's been nominated for the Joe Shuster Award for Best Canadian Writer several times. Ed's current project is Beyond the Breach from Aftershock Comics. According to Ed, the book follows the fallout of a cataclysmic event called the Breach that knocks the population of Earth unconscious. When they wake, they find that all electronic devices have been rendered useless and huge swaths of the planet overwritten with alien landscapes and creatures. Creatures both friendly and deadly. And so, without further ado, here's my chat with Ed Brisson about Beyond the Breach. So, Ed Brisson, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Okay, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Cool. Well, before we get started with the questions, I want to ask you, what are you reading now?
Right now, so what I've been reading the last few days, actually, is I'm revisiting some of Bendis's earlier work. I've been reading Alias again, which I haven't read in probably at least a decade. Yeah, I've just kind of been dipping back into some classics, just sort of reconnecting with it. Alias is one of the books, I think like a lot of people, I had that period of time where I'd stopped reading comics. For me, it was the late 90s.
Yep.
And Alias was one of the books that sort of brought me back into reading comics. Yeah, it's been a great thing to revisit. It still holds up. It's almost 20, I think it is 20 years old now, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
But cool, it's such a great book. I love it. Other than that, I'm reading a novel by Ben Piercy, who's also a comic book writer. He's on X-Force right now. And Wolverine, he has a new book out called The Ninth Metal, which I'm just in the middle of reading. And When I say I'm in the middle of reading, I'm 5 chapters in. I've been having a lot of trouble trying to find the time to read it.
Sure. Well, that's the same for everybody, trying to find time. Like I was saying, I got like a pile of books I got to get to, and life intrudes. But you do the best you can, right? That's what. So we're here talking about your newest project, Beyond the Breach. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about it, maybe explain maybe where it came from, its origins as well.
So it's kind of, the origins are kind of all over the place, because it's almost like an amalgam of a few ideas that I had bouncing around that all seem to somehow just all come together and make, none of them worked kind of on their own, but when I put it together, it made a good story stew, I guess. The real push behind it came from at the beginning of the pandemic. Both Damien and I kind of found ourselves with more time on our hands than we normally have, and we've worked together a bunch in the past on create our own stuff, going back as far as I think 2005, 2006. We did a pitch and 3 issues of a book that ended up not coming out. Just it was signed up with a smaller publisher, a whole bunch of stuff around it. Anyway. Yeah, we just wanted to do a book. We talked about the kind of stuff we wanted to do, and he wanted to do something where you could design some cool creatures, he wanted to do something kind of horror-like. I wanted to do sort of a road trip story, and I'm a big fan of taking road trips, and since, we're all kind of like housebound, this is a way I could sort of like take a road trip within the story that we're telling. So, yeah, we kind of came up with this idea that that became Beyond the Breach, which is this idea of a woman from Halifax who goes on a road trip to California at the same moment that this event called the breach happens, where sort of I won't spoil too much about how it happens or anything. We'll find out as the series goes along. But essentially, like, this sort of event happens in the sky and sort of, opens up and releases these alien-like, possible interdimensional creatures upon California, where she is, and just drops her right into chaos right at the beginning. So she's, fighting for her life almost immediately and trying to figure out what's going on. And the story is about sort of finding family in this chaos and finding people along the way, not your real family, but your family in this sort of trauma and chaos that you're in the middle of. And so it's a road trip about these creatures that are here. There's all sorts of different creatures. And as the trip sort of goes on, you start to realize that geographically, this has sort of happened everywhere that they're able to travel. This has happened so far. They keep coming across it. But the sort of types of creatures and what it looks like changes from one geographical region to the next. And that was kind of like a thing we wanted to do, where this could almost feel like an intergalactic, thing where you're going from planet to planet, and each planet's going to be different. Only it's all here on Earth. So California might be different. Arizona might, it's not geographically, it's not that clean, with the borders, but every geographical area is going to be completely different, which will present all sorts of different challenges, some really cool design stuff that we can, keep switching it up design-wise and do some really interesting stuff. And just, it's not always even going to be a challenge. There's going to be friendly creatures, monsters, et cetera, et cetera.
Cool. It sounds very intense and exciting at the same time. So that's pretty cool. Pretty cool stuff. You mentioned working with Damien, and you both worked on projects at Marvel, but this is your first time both working with publisher Aftershock. I'm wondering, what sort of creative freedom did you have on this, and what was the experience like?
I had pitched this to Aftershock because one of the editors there, Christina Harrington, was an editor of mine at Marvel. She worked on Old Man Logan when I was writing it. And so I'd liked working with her at Marvel, and when she went over to Aftershock, we'd had a conversation at some point about me possibly pitching stuff there. And so, when we started putting this together, it seemed like, why not give them a shot? So we pitched it. They liked it. Creatively, it's been pretty great. They're pretty. They help sort of steer the ship. They help guide you, but they're not ever trying to grab the wheel, if you know what I mean. They're not trying to direct the story. They give us all the freedom we want, and are really just there trying to help us tell the best possible story that we want to tell. And so it's been great. Yeah, it's been a really positive experience so far.
Good. Glad to hear. Now, I've talked to other creators during this time about whether horror type stories are their way of dealing with this pandemic. So I'm wondering, is Beyond the Breach your way of dealing with this issue? Is that true?
I wouldn't have thought when I started it, like, I would have said no when I started putting this project together, but like, looking back on it and reading the story, it's hard not to see it there, in the story, because it's, it's about this person all of a sudden faced with this, like, you could almost make a case that the aliens are like a stand-in for COVID, right? Like, she's faced with this thing where she's, through the story, she ends up becoming isolated. She can't contact her family back in Halifax. And so, yeah, I think that there definitely is some COVID anxiety that went into the script, but I don't think it's, I want to say that it's not as simple as just like some sort of COVID analog story. It's definitely not that, but I think you can definitely see the anxiety of what myself and the rest of the world was going through, and are still going through, I guess. That's definitely there in the DNA of the book.
I was reading in your most recent newsletter that you moved your office out of the basement to upstairs. So I just want to ask you a personal question, whether you find that location can influence your productivity as a creator.
Yeah, so I think the problem with my office in the basement, it was larger, but it had a few things going for it. One thing is when we moved into this house, I had pegged that room as my office from the first time we saw the house, but for some reason, it wasn't until I was in that space for about a month that I noticed that there's not a door on the room. which is like an easy enough thing to remedy. I could get someone in to put on a door. But the other thing is that my office downstairs, if you need to get to our garage, you have to go through my office. And we have a treadmill in the garage that family uses. So, there is a reason for them to go there. And then on the other side is our sort of storage room that we use as like a canned goods and dry goods pantry as well. And so, if somebody's making something to eat, a lot of times they'll have to go to the pantry to grab something. So I find that it was kind of a thoroughfare. And not, it wasn't like people were coming and going all the time, but, my wife and kid periodically would have to go through, and it's weirdly, it's disruptive in that, like, if I'm really focused on what I'm writing or what I'm working on, and I get pulled out of it, it takes me a long time to get back into that mindset. So even like a 30-second disruption can set me off by like 30 minutes. Yep. So I was actually looking at getting office outside the house, which I may still do. We'll see. Realize we have a spare bedroom upstairs, but obviously, we have not had anybody visit for a year and a half. And so I just took the bed apart and emptied it out and just moved my office upstairs. And we're going to convert my old office, I think, into a library. So I didn't bring any of my bookshelves up here because my new office is smaller.
Right.
But yeah, like I think because it has a door that I can lock, and it's got fewer distractions around. It's keeping it pretty simple. I'm not bringing, like I said, I'm not bringing my bookshelves up and stuff. So far, it's been great for productivity, but we're like 6 days in, so
right. Time will tell.
Yeah, we'll see how this goes. I find that I am a sort of what's the word I'm looking for? I'm a sucker for like new switching things up, and then I'll brag about how great this new technique I'm using is for productivity, and then 2 weeks goes by and I fall back into old habits until I discover something else that's new that helps me be more productive. It's sure. Like a never-ending cycle with me.
Well, there's always a shed in the backyard, I suppose. That's a worst-case scenario. But.
Well, I was actually looking at that before moving here. I was looking at plans for building an office out back.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah.
See.
Never know.
Next time you talk to me, I may be out back.
Okay, very good. Well, speaking about what's next, I remember last year we talked about Catch and Release, part of your murder book series, and just curious if you have another entry in mind for the future.
So, yeah, right now the book is actually done. We're just in the test reading phase on Catch and Release. So hopefully we're sending that to print soon. And Lysandra and I have been talking about doing another book. Timeline on that, though, I do not know. Because I don't want to jump into something too quickly. I want to see this whole Kickstarter thing through to the end and sort of take a minute or two to sort of evaluate the whole process and see how I would do things differently with the next Kickstarter. But yeah, there's a very rough idea sort of germinating right now. I just have to sort of figure out what the story really is. I've got some cool scenes and I've got cool bits, but I don't know what the full story is yet. And so once I can nail that down, then I'll probably start writing, and then we'll see. But hopefully, if things go well, maybe by the end of the year. My gut's telling me maybe not till early next year, though.
Thanks to Ed for the chat. You can discover more about Ed on Twitter at Ed Brisson and online at edbrisson.com. Discover more about Beyond the Breach at aftershockcomics.com/beyond-the-breach. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts. And please leave a good rating. Also check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website and follow along on Twitter at True North Comics. True North Country Comics is now on YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel. Please send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks again for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2021.